its head from side to side, causing powerful concussion waves, which pummeled the canyon wall. The creature's efforts served only to exhaust it. After several minutes, the predator stopped thrashing, ceasing all movement. Within the tangled steel, the only sign of life came from the occasional flutter of its gills. Slowly, the Kiku's winch began pulling the entrapped megalodon up toward the frigid waters above. The thrashing movements of the dying male sent vibrations cascading throughout the Challenger deep. It appeared out of nowhere, sweeping directly over Jonas, its deathly glow illuminating the black landscape like an enormous moon. Its sheer mass took several seconds to pass overhead. Until he caught sight of its towering tail fin, Jonas thought it might be some kind of submarine. The female megalodon was at least 15 feet longer than the male, weighing well over 20 tons. A casual slap of her caudal fin sent a concussion wave exploding against the damaged sub, lifting and pushing it down the gully. Jonas braced himself as the AG-2 skidded across the canyon floor, flipping twice before settling in another cloud of silt. He pressed his face to the window and, as the muck settled, saw the female rise toward the male, still struggling in the cable. Closing to within 2 body lengths, the female charged upward in a burst of acceleration and drove her hyperextended jaws around the soft underbelly of her mate. The colossal impact drove the smaller megalodon 50 feet upward while the attacker's 9-inch serrated teeth tore open its white hide, exposing its heart and stomach. The Kiku's winch bit into the slack, gaining momentum, pulling the cable upward even as the female swallowed a massive hunk of her mate's digestive tract. Jonas could just make out the diminishing glow of the female as she continued rising with the carcass, her snout buried deep within the male's bleeding body, her swollen white belly quivering in spasms as she engulfed huge chunks of flesh and entrails. The female was pregnant, almost to term, her unborn pup's hunger insatiable. She refused to abandon her meal, even though she was now feeding in icy waters never before ventured. But the tropical temperatured blood of her mate was bathing her in a thick river of warmth, escorting her upwards as she rose out of the depths, making the journey tolerable. And so she continued feeding, her murderous jaws entrenched deep within the wound, shredding the spleen and duodenum as hundreds of gallons of warm blood gushed over her torso, protecting her from the cold. She's moving through the cold, Jonas realized. Trapped in his sub, Jonas watched the thrashing white glow disappear overhead, leaving the blackness of the canyon to close back around him. Terry, DeMarco, and Heller had come out on deck, where the ship's medical team and at least a dozen other crew members peered over the railing, waiting for their missing comrade to surface. Captain Barr stared at the iron O-ring that suspended the pulley from the steel frame of the winch. It was straining under the weight of its load, threatening to snap apart at any moment. "I don't know what's on the other end of this," he said gravely, "but it sure as hell is more than DJ's sub." Jonas knew he'd suffocate if he didn't act quickly. The wings of his sub had been mangled in the crash, and the engine was out of commission. It would be impossible to ascend with the dead weight of the mechanical end of the craft. He had to find the emergency lever and jettison the Lexan escape pod. Jonas was drenched in sweat and beginning to feel dizzy. He couldn't be sure if it was from loss of blood or the steadily diminishing oxygen. Waves of panic aggravated by the claustrophobia rattled his nerves. His fingers groped along the floor beneath his stomach, locating the small storage compartment. Jonas leaned backward, pulling open the hatch, straining to reach the spare tank of oxygen. He unscrewed a valve and released a steady stream of air into the pod. Now he rolled back into the cockpit's harness, strapping himself into position. Feeling along his right, he found the metal latch box, opened it, then gripped the emergency lever, readying himself. Jonas yanked back hard on the handle, and a bright flash seared the darkness behind him, jolting him against the pilot's harness as the capsule exploded into the water and over the canyon floor. The pod had 2 short, stabilizing wings, but still it twisted under the impact of the explosion, spiraling through the water. Gradually, the Lexan pod lost its forward momentum and began a gentle ascent. The clear capsule rose quickly. Still, it would be several hours before it reached the surface, and Jonas knew he had to concentrate on keeping warm. His clothes were soaked with perspiration, and the temperature was plummeting. The green surface waters began to bubble with a bright pink froth. Then the enormous white head of the male megalodon broke the surface. Below, the steel cable held together the few hunks of flesh and connective tissue still attached to the long spinal column and caudal fin, which dangled in the water beneath it. The crew of the Kiku stared in amazement as the remains of the devoured monster were hauled out of the water and across the broad deck of the ship. Twisted into the cable, dangling from the monstrous head of the giant shark, were the mangled remains of DJ Tanaka's sub. Terry collapsed to her knees, staring blankly at the incomprehensible disaster before her. Frank Heller lowered his binoculars and scanned the seascape with his naked eye. From the bridge he could see all three Zodiac search boats, scattered within a quarter-mile periphery of the Kiku. DeMarco stood beside him at the rail. "The Navy choppers better get here soon," he said. "It's too late. If he doesn't surface in the next 10 minutes... Heller didn't finish the sentence. They both knew that if Jonas hadn't been killed by the megalodon, he'd certainly die from exposure. Heller turned to look for the 100th time at the giant white head and the spinal column of the monster on the deck below. The science team was examining the carcass. One member was taking photographs. "If that thing killed DJ, what on God's earth killed it?" he said. DeMarco stared down at the bloody head. "I don't know, but it sure as shit wasn't a landslide." Terry stood at the bow of the yellow Zodiac as it bounced through the choppy water. She searched the waves ahead of her for a glimpse of the other AG-2 pod. Until they found it, she had no time for grieving, no time for the pain in her heart. She had to locate Jonas while any chance remained. Leon Barr steered from the rear of the boat. "I'm going to circle back," he shouted. "Wait!" Terry saw something in the swells. She pointed off the starboard bow. "Over there!" The red vinyl flag was just visible over the crest of the waves. Leon guided them to the capsule, which bobbed gently in the water. They could see Jonas's body through the Lexan escape pod. "Is he alive?" Leon asked, peering over the bow. Terry leaned over the water as they drew close. "Yes," she said gratefully. "He's alive." Frank Heller couldn't figure out how the news had spread so quickly. It had taken less than 12 hours for the Kiku to reach the Ora Harbor Naval Base in Guam. 2 Japanese television crews and one from the local station were waiting for them on the dock, along with press reporters and photographers for the Navy, the Manila Times, and the local Guam Sentinel. They surrounded Heller the moment he disembarked, bombarding him with questions about the giant shark, the dead pilot, and the surviving scientists who'd been airlifted ahead for medical treatment. "Professor Taylor suffered a concussion and is being treated for hypothermia and blood loss, but I understand he is recovering well," Heller told them. The cameramen trained their lenses on Heller, but when the carcass of the megalodon was hoisted up on the crane, they scrambled for a shot. "It looks like it's been eaten," said the balding American with bushy eyebrows. "Is it possible another shark attacked this one?" "It's possible, but are you saying there are more out there? Did anyone see? Do you think?" Heller raised his hands. Please, one at a time." He nodded to a heavyset man from the Guam paper with his pen raised in the air. "I guess what we want to know, Doc, is whether it's safe to go in the water." Heller spoke confidently. "Let me put your fears to rest. If there are any more of these sharks in Mariana Trench, 6 miles of near-freezing water stands between them and us. Apparently, it's kept them trapped down there for over 2 million years. It'll probably keep them down there a few million more. Dr. Heller, if you don't mind, we've all got a lot of work to do." Heller pushed off through the crowd, ignoring the flurry of questions that followed him. "Gangway!" came a thundering voice from behind. Leon Barr was supervising the transferal of the megalodon carcass onto the dock. A photographer pushed to the front and shouted, "Captain, could we get your picture with the monster?" Barr waved his arm at the crane operator. The megalodon head came to a stop in midair, its spine and caudal fin dragging on the dock, and its jaws open to the sky. The cameramen scrambled for an angle, but the carcass was so long it would not fit into the frame. Barr walked up beside the giant head, turned to face them. The monstrous predator made the burly man look like a small child. "Smile, Captain," someone shouted. Barr continued staring grimly. "I am," he grunted. Maggie was lying topless on the teakwood deck of the yacht. The sun beat down upon the oil glistening on her body. "You always said a tan looks good on camera." Bud stood over her in his swim trunks, his face lost in the glare. Maggie shielded her eyes, squinted up at him. "This is for you, baby," she said with a smile. "But not now." She turned over on her stomach and watched a tiny television. "Now you can fetch me another drink." "Sure, Maggie," he said, his eyes drifting down her back. "Anything you say." He shuffled off to the cabin of the magnate to mix a vodka and tonic. A minute later, she screamed his name. Bud ran out on deck. Maggie was sitting up, clutching the towel to her breasts, staring open-mouthed at the TV. "I don't believe it." "What?" Bud hurried over, looked at the TV. The megalodon's head and fang-studded jaws filled the monitor, dangling from the crane of the Kiku. Could be the giant prehistoric shark known as the megalodon, ancestor of the great white. No one seems to know how the shark could have survived, but Dr. Jonas Taylor, who was injured in the capture, may be able to provide some answers. The professor is currently recovering at the Naval Hospital in Guam. In China today, negotiations for a trade. Maggie rushed for the cabin. "Phone," she screamed at the captain. She dialed the overseas operator to connect her to Guam. Several minutes later, the line was ringing. "Adashek." "David, what the fuck is happening?" "Maggie, I've been trying to call you all morning. Where the hell have—" "Never mind that. What's going on? Where did that shark come from? Where's Jonas? Has anyone spoken with him yet?" "Hey, slow down. Jonas is recovering in the Guam Naval Hospital with a guard posted at his door so no one can speak with him. The shark's for real. Looks like you were wrong about your husband." Maggie felt ill. "Maggie, you still there?" "Shit. This could be the story of the decade. Jonas is a major player and I missed the whole thing." "True, but you are Jonas's wife, right? Maybe he can tell you about the other shark." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. "What other shark?" "The one that devoured the monster that killed the Tanaka kid. Everybody's talking about it, but the Tanaka Institute's people are in denial. Maybe Jonas would talk to you." Maggie's mind raced. Okay, I'm coming to Guam, but I want you to stay on the story. Try to find out what the authorities are going to do to locate this other shark." "Maggie, they don't even know if it surfaced. The crew of the Kiku are swearing that it never left the trench, claiming the thing's still trapped down there." "Just do as I say. There's an extra 1,000 in it for you if you can get me some inside information from any reliable source about this second shark. I'll call you as soon as I land in Guam." "You're the boss." Maggie hung up. Bud was standing next to her. "What's going on, Mags?" "Bud, I need your help. Who do you know in Guam?" The Navy MP on duty outside Jonas's room at the Ora Naval Hospital rose to attention as Terry approached the door. "Sorry, ma'am. No press allowed." "I'm not with the press." The MP eyed her suspiciously. "My name is Terry Tanaka. I was with—" "Oh, excuse me." The MP stepped aside. "My apologies, ma'am, and my condolences." He averted his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly and entered Jonas's room. Jonas lay near the window, a gauze bandage wrapped around his forehead. He looked exhausted, his face pale and scared. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice still weak. Terry nodded silently.